In just 33 seconds, Prince Harry would go from composed royal to furious guest storming toward the studio exit, leaving Lorraine Kelly's morning show in absolute chaos. What started as pointed questions about his recent media appearances would spiral into a verbal battleground that exposed the raw nerves beneath both their carefully constructed public personas, culminating in the most explosive television moment of the year. The tension was palpable from the moment Prince Harry settled into the bright orange chair across from Lorraine Kelly's desk. The morning show host had that familiar gleam in her eye, the one that regular viewers knew meant she was ready to dig deep, perhaps deeper than her guest was prepared for. Harry adjusted his jacket, his jaw already set in that defensive line that had become increasingly familiar in his recent public appearances. "Right then, Harry," Lorraine began, her Scottish accent carrying that deceptively warm tone that often preceded her most penetrating questions. "Let's talk about this pattern we've been seeing. Every few months, there's another interview, another documentary, another revelation about the royal family. Some people are starting to wonder, when does it end?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Harry's media team, positioned just off camera, shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the gentle warm-up they'd been promised during pre-show discussions. "I think that's a bit unfair, Lorraine," Harry replied, his voice measured but with an edge creeping in. "Everything I've shared has been about healing, about breaking cycles of pain and trauma. If people find that uncomfortable, maybe they should ask themselves why." Lorraine leaned forward slightly, her practiced television smile never wavering but her eyes sharpening with predatory focus. "But healing for whom, exactly? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've built quite a lucrative career out of airing your family's dirty laundry. The Netflix deals, the book advances. It's all very convenient, isn't it?" The accusation hit its mark. Harry's composure cracked just slightly, a flash of anger crossing his features before he regained control. "That's incredibly reductive. You're sitting there, making judgments about my family's trauma as if it's entertainment. As if my mother's death, my father's failings, my brother's jealousy, as if these are just storylines for your viewers' consumption." "Your brother's jealousy?" Lorraine pounced on the phrase like a cat on a mouse. "That's interesting. William's jealous of what exactly? Your exile? Your constant need for attention? Help me understand." The studio audience, carefully selected for their likely sympathetic response to Harry, began to murmur. Some seemed uncomfortable with Lorraine's aggressive approach, while others appeared captivated by the increasingly hostile exchange. Harry's laugh was hollow, bitter. "You really want to go there? Fine. William's jealous because he knows he'll never be the man our mother raised me to be. He's trapped in a system that's slowly killing him, just like it killed her, and he resents that I had the courage to break free." "Courage?" Lorraine's voice rose slightly, her professional veneer beginning to slip. "Is that what we're calling it now? Running away to California, signing million-pound deals to trash your family on television, that's courage?" The words stung, and Harry's restraint began to unravel visibly. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles whitening. "You have no idea what courage looks like. You sit in this studio every morning, gossiping about people's lives, making judgments from your safe little bubble. When's the last time you took a real risk? When's the last time you stood up for something that mattered?" Lorraine's smile finally disappeared completely, replaced by a cold stare that would have intimidated lesser guests. "Don't you dare lecture me about risk, Harry. I've been doing this job for decades, asking the questions that need to be asked, holding people accountable. You think because you're a prince, you're above scrutiny? Your grandmother would be spinning in her grave." The mention of Queen Elizabeth hit Harry like a physical blow. His face flushed red, and for a moment, the careful media training that had shaped his public appearances seemed to desert him entirely. "How fucking dare you bring her into this? She understood what I was going through. She supported my decision to—" "Did she?" Lorraine interrupted, her voice cutting through his protest like a blade. "Because the reports I read suggested she was devastated by your departure, hurt by your public attacks on the institution she dedicated her life to serving. But I suppose that doesn't fit your narrative, does it?" The studio had gone completely silent, except for the low hum of cameras still rolling. Even the crew members seemed frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation continue escalating. Harry stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that made several audience members jump. This is exactly the kind of tabloid bullshit that drove my wife and me away in the first place. You pretend to care about mental health, about family values, but really you just want to exploit our pain for ratings. Sit down, Harry, Lorraine commanded, her voice carrying an authority that had cowed politicians and celebrities for years. We're not finished here. But Harry remained standing, his chest rising and falling with barely contained fury. No, I think we are finished. This isn't journalism, it's character assassination dressed up as morning television. The confrontation had reached a tipping point, with both host and guest locked in a battle of wills that neither seemed willing to back down from. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every heated exchange, every flash of anger, every moment of this unprecedented breakdown in civility. What happened next would determine whether this remained a heated but manageable television moment, or whether it would explode into something far more damaging for both parties involved. Lorraine wasn't backing down. If anything, Harry's defiance seemed to fuel her determination to break through his carefully constructed victim narrative. She leaned back in her chair, a calculated smile playing at the corners of her mouth, the expression of a predator who just cornered her prey. Character assassination? She repeated, her voice dripping with theatrical disbelief. That's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of assassinating his own family's character. Tell me, Harry, how much did Netflix pay you to throw your father under the bus? Was there a bonus for every private conversation you revealed? The audience gasped audibly. Even by Lorraine's standards, this was brutal. Harry's face went from red to white in seconds, his hands trembling with barely suppressed rage. You're fucking unbelievable, he snarled, abandoning any pretense of royal composure. At least I'm telling the truth about my own experiences. You're just a gossip merchant in a designer jacket, profiting off other people's misery. Truth? Lorraine laughed, but it was a harsh sound devoid of any warmth. Your truth changes depending on which platform pays you the most. First it was Oprah, then it was your memoir, now it's Netflix documentaries. What's next, Harry? A podcast about how terrible it was being a millionaire prince? The studio lights seemed to bear down on them both, creating an almost gladiatorial atmosphere. Harry's media handler had risen from her seat off camera, clearly debating whether to intervene, but the confrontation had taken on a life of its own. You want to know what's terrible? Harry shot back, his voice rising to match Lorraine's energy. It's people like you, pretending to care about mental health one minute, then tearing people apart the next. You're part of the machine that killed my mother, and you're too arrogant to admit it. The mention of Diana again seemed to hit Lorraine like a challenge she couldn't resist. She stood up from behind her desk, her own composure finally cracking completely. Don't you dare hide behind your mother's death every time someone calls out your bullshit. Diana would be ashamed of what you've become. A bitter, entitled man-child who can't take responsibility for his own choices. The words hung in the air like a slap. Several audience members audibly gasped, and one woman in the front row covered her mouth in shock. Even some of the crew members looked uncomfortable with how personal the attack had become. Harry's response was immediate and volcanic. Ashamed? She'd be ashamed of you, you vicious cow. Sitting there, profiting off tragedy, pretending to be some moral authority when you're nothing but a tabloid hack in a TV studio. Vicious cow? Lorraine's voice reached a pitch that cut through the studio like a knife. How dare you speak to me like that in my own studio? You think your title gives you the right to abuse women when they don't bow and scrape to your victim complex? The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Harry, who'd positioned himself as a champion of women's rights, had just used language that completely undermined that image. But he was too far gone in his anger to recognize the trap he'd walked into. Victim complex? Harry's laugh was wild, unhinged. You want to talk about victims? Let's talk about how you've built your entire career on victimizing people who can't fight back. At least I have the balls to put my name on my opinions, instead of hiding behind sources close to and anonymous tips. Lorraine moved closer to where Harry was standing, her finger pointed accusingly at his chest. I've never hidden from anything in my life. I've asked tough questions of prime ministers, celebrities, and yes, spoiled princes who think the world owes them something. If you can't handle basic scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't have courted the spotlight in the first place. Basic scrutiny? Harry's voice cracked with incredulous rage. You called my wife a manipulative American gold digger on air last month. You suggested my children weren't really royal blood. That's not scrutiny. That's racism dressed up as journalism. I never said those things, Lorraine protested, but her voice carried less conviction than before. The accusation of racism was clearly one she hadn't expected, and it seemed to rattle her more than Harry's previous attacks. Bullshit! Harry exploded. You said Meghan knew exactly what she was doing when she married me. You questioned why our children received titles. Don't stand there and pretend you haven't been part of the racist campaign against my family. The studio had become a pressure cooker, with both participants locked in a battle that had spiraled far beyond anything their respective PR teams could have anticipated. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every venomous word, every accusatory gesture, every moment of this unprecedented breakdown. Lorraine's face was flushed with anger, and something that might have been embarrassment. How dare you call me a racist? I've spent my career supporting diversity, championing causes. Supporting diversity? Harry interrupted, his voice reaching dangerous levels. You mean like when you spent 3 weeks analyzing every detail of Meghan's dress choices, looking for reasons to criticize her? Or when you questioned whether she was grateful enough for joining the royal family? The accusations were coming thick and fast now, each one more personal than the last. What had started as a professional interview had devolved into something resembling a public therapy session, with decades of resentment and frustration pouring out from both sides. But the most explosive moment was still to come, and neither Harry nor Lorraine seemed aware of just how close they were to crossing a line that would make this confrontation impossible to contain or control. The breaking point came when Lorraine, her professional mask completely shattered, decided to go for the nuclear option. Her eyes gleamed with the kind of ruthless calculation that had made her both feared and respected in British television for decades. You know what, Harry? She said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone that somehow carried more menace than all her previous shouting. I think I know what this is really about. It's not about racism. It's not about the press. It's not even about your precious mother. This is about a man who's never been told no in his entire privileged life, finally facing the consequences of his actions. Harry's eyes narrowed, sensing the trap but unable to resist walking into it. What consequences? For what? Lorraine smiled, and it was the coldest expression anyone in that studio had ever seen. For being second best. For being the spare. For watching your brother get everything you thought you deserved, and then burning it all down when you realized you'd never measure up. The words hit Harry like a physical blow. His face went completely white, then flushed with a rage so intense it seemed to radiate heat. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of a hurricane. You heartless bitch, he breathed, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. You know nothing about my life, about what I've sacrificed, about what I've endured. Nothing. I know enough, Lorraine shot back, emboldened by having clearly struck a nerve. I know you've spent your entire adult life making excuses for why nothing is ever your fault. The army, the Nazi costume, the Vegas photos, leaving your duties. It's always someone else's responsibility, isn't it? The studio audience had gone beyond uncomfortable into genuine shock. Several people were openly staring, and at least one woman was recording on her phone despite security protocols. The crew members looked like they wanted to intervene but were too captivated by the carnage unfolding before them. Harry took a step toward Lorraine, his whole body trembling with fury. You want to talk about responsibility? Let's talk about yours. How many lives have you ruined with your fucking show? How many people have you driven to break down for the sake of ratings? At least I don't hide behind mental health campaigns while making millions off my family's trauma, Lorraine snarled back, moving closer until they were almost nose to nose. You're a hypocrite and a coward, and everyone can see it except you. Coward? Harry's voice broke on the word, years of suppressed anger finally erupting. I served my country while you sat in studios, gossiping. I've fought for causes you've never even heard of. I've tried to protect my family from vultures like you, and this is what I get for it? Protect your family? Lorraine's laugh was vicious. You've exposed them to more scrutiny than they've faced in decades. Every interview you give, every documentary you make, Every time you open your mouth, you make it worse for them. You're not protecting anyone. You're feeding them to the wolves for profit." The accusation seemed to drain all the fight out of Harry for a moment. His shoulders sagged, and for just an instant, he looked less like a defiant prince and more like a broken man. But then, his anger reignited with even greater intensity. "At least I'm honest about my mistakes," he said, his voice rising again. "You sit there, pretending to be this champion of truth and justice, but you're just another parasite feeding off other people's pain. My mother was right about people like you. You're the real cancer in this system." Lorraine's face twisted with genuine offense. "Don't you dare compare me to the people who hounded your mother. I've spent my career giving people a voice. Holding power to account." "Holding power to account?" Harry interrupted, his voice reaching levels that made the microphones crackle. "You are the power now, Lorraine. You and your network buddies. Deciding who gets torn apart for entertainment. You've become everything you claim to fight against." The truth of the accusation seemed to hit Lorraine harder than any of Harry's previous attacks. For a moment, she looked genuinely shaken, as if seeing herself through his eyes for the first time. But her recovery was swift and brutal. "Get out," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through Harry's tirade like a blade. "Get out of my studio right now." Harry blinked, caught off guard by the abrupt shift. "What?" "You heard me. Get the fuck out. I don't have to sit here and be abused by some entitled brat who thinks his title gives him the right to speak to me like dirt." Lorraine's voice was shaking with rage now, all pretense of professional composure abandoned. "Security!" The studio erupted into chaos. Harry's media handler finally sprang into action, rushing toward the set while speaking rapidly into her earpiece. Security personnel appeared from the wings, though they seemed uncertain about how to handle ejecting a member of the royal family. Harry stood frozen for a moment, clearly not having expected this outcome. Then his anger returned with renewed force. "Fine, I wouldn't want to contaminate myself with this toxic fucking environment anyway. You've just proven every point I've ever made about British media." "Security, escort His Highness out," Lorraine commanded, her voice dripping with sarcasm on the title. "Make sure he doesn't steal any of the furniture on his way." The final insult broke whatever restraint Harry had left. "You're nothing but a bitter old woman who gets off on destroying people," he shouted as security approached him. "History will remember you as exactly what you are, a fucking parasite. And it'll remember you as a spoiled child who never grew up." Lorraine shot back, following him as he moved toward the exit. "Your grandmother's legacy deserved better than you." Harry spun around one final time, his face a mask of absolute fury. "My grandmother understood me better than you ever could, and she'd be disgusted by what you've become. A tabloid queen pretending to be a journalist." With that, he turned and strode toward the studio exit, his security team and media handler scrambling to keep up. The audience sat in stunned silence, many still recording despite security attempts to stop them. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of the unprecedented meltdown. As Harry reached the studio doors, he turned back one final time, his voice carrying across the silent studio with devastating clarity. "This is exactly why we left, and exactly why we were right to do it. You people are poison." The doors slammed behind him with a finality that seemed to echo through the stunned studio. Lorraine stood alone on her set, chest heaving, makeup smudged, looking like she'd just survived a natural disaster. The audience remained frozen, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply sit in shocked silence. After what felt like an eternity, Lorraine slowly walked back to her desk, her legs visibly shaking. She looked directly into the camera, her professional persona attempting to reassert itself, even as her voice trembled with residual anger. "Well," she said, attempting a smile that looked more like a grimace, "I think we can safely say that was the most honest conversation Prince Harry has had on British television in years." The studio remained silent. Outside, the sound of car doors slamming and engines starting could be heard as Harry's entourage made their rapid departure. The interview that was supposed to rehabilitate both their public images had instead exposed the raw, ugly truth about the bitter divisions tearing apart the very fabric of British society. As the credits rolled over Lorraine's shaken face, one thing was certain: this confrontation would be replayed, analyzed, and debated for years to come, and neither participant had emerged unscathed from the wreckage of their mutual destruction.